All right, welcome back, everyone. In this quick video, we want to discuss the different data types that we have to work with in our programs and in Python specifically, and the different kind of math that we can do with those pieces of information, and essentially how we make the variables that store that type of information. So, first and foremost, let's go through the three different data types that we're really going to work with, maybe a fourth that we'll work with later on. You have two different number types. You have real numbers and you have integer numbers. Real numbers are those with decimals. Integers are those without decimals. In Python, we actually call those ints, okay, and floats. Those would be our real number data type. In our pseudocode, we will call it real. But when we come over here to Python, we will have to actually call it a float. That's just Python's wording for that particular value. Other languages have other words that they use as well. For instance, Java will use double for a lot of them for decimal types, as well as float, whereas Python only really has the two. The third data type we want to discuss is a collection of characters, which we call a string. In Python, we call that based on class string or str. A collection of characters is nothing more than whatever characters you like type in, held between quotation marks, whether they be single or double quotes, doesn't make much difference in Python. But that would be a string, and it would allow us to do different things. These different data types give us the ability to do different types of math. So, for instance, if I were to do certain things like a 2 plus 3, you're going to notice since 2 and 3 are both integers, I'm going to get an answer of 5, an integer result. If I were to type in a 2.0 plus 3.0, I know, sorry, 2.0 plus 3.0, I know in my head a 2.0, if I can get this typed out right, is the same thing as a 2, and a 3.0 is the same thing as a 3. So when I add the 2 in my head, I'm saying it's 5 all day. But when I do that, here it's 5.0. And that may not be a big difference to you, but in terms of the information you get out and how you're going to parse it and work with it in different forms, different functions, different things of that, it is important for you to know the type of information you have to work with. Okay. I could even do this 2 plus 3. Obviously, they're still numbers, a 2 and a 3, and if I add them together in all the other examples, I got some variation of 5 when I press enter on that, but since they're strings, I actually get a 23 collection of characters as a string. It concatenates and actually puts them together. So another great example as to why it's absolutely important for you to understand the data type that you are actually working with, because not only does it tell you the answer you might get, whether it's a 5, a 5.0, or a 23, but it also tells you the type of math that you can do. So, for instance, I can do a 6 minus 4, and I'll get 2. But if I were to do this, it's not going to allow me to do it. I am not able to do that particular operation between those two pieces of information because they're not of the right data type. I can only use a subtraction operation between two numerical data types, whether they be integers or floats, integers or real numbers. There are lots of instances like that. Addition can be done with any data type. Even multiplication can be done if done appropriately, especially in Python. For instance, if I did something like 6 times 8, okay, I'm mixing them, but I can do exactly what it says because essentially multiplication is iterative addition. So it's addition that happens a lot. So it's telling me to give myself 8 sixes. Okay. Now you do also have to be very careful. If I were to take that same 6 and multiply it by 8.0, it's not going to like that because I can't multiply a string by a float, even though the float that I have is technically an integer in value or equivalent in value. It doesn't make any difference. So you do have to be very careful about the data type that you classify a number as in your program, especially in your pseudocode and flowchart, so that we know what kind of work we can actually do with it and what kind of answer to expect when working with it. Okay. Now, in terms of variables, let's give that a go. Okay, so let me kind of give ourselves a little break here. We'll just kind of work at the bottom of the screen. Let me move this over so we can see it a little better. All right. Variables. Variables are nothing more than a named space in memory. Okay. We don't want to work with the raw memory address. It's just not convenient for us. So, what we can do is type out a variable name, something like total, okay, equals 12. And what it'll do is it'll store it for us. It'll store that value in that variable so that I can work with it. If I go to print it, it'll actually print the value of 12. Or I could say something like this. I can say num1 equals 4, num2 equals 5.3, and I could say sum or total again equals num1 plus num2, and I could print the total. Whoops. And it would print 9.3. Again, I know it's going to be a decimal because I'm adding an integer and a float or a real number, and it's going to give me a real number solution. But the deal is, variables are just a way to store information. Now, a couple key features that you have to be wary of is your variable identifier always has to go on the left hand side of an equal sign. So every time we're writing in pseudocode, or if we're writing in a flowchart, or we're writing in our Python program, our variable name has to be on the left hand side of an equal sign before it ever ends up on the right hand side of an equal sign. You've got to input it, you've got to set it, you've got to calculate it, you've got to do something to get a value in there before you try to use a variable with an associated value. So for instance, if I did this and I said something like 3 equals num3, it's not going to like that because I can't assign a literal to that particular constant, whatever that may be. Variable names also have to be um, written out correctly. They should be descriptive into what they hold. Let's say I'm doing a problem like what I had before with the gross pay and hours worked. I need to make sure that I use variables that are descriptive. Hours worked, gross pay, net pay, pay rate are all fantastic words to use in that particular problem. But you do have to be careful in how you type it. If I were to type out something like this, pay rate equals 12.4, okay, it's not going to like that either because a variable must be a single word. I'd like to use more than one word because it makes it descriptive. So what I can do here are a couple different things. I personally like to camel case. I will make the first word and first letter of that word lowercase, and every new word I will capitalize the first letter of it. So pay rate equals 12.4. That logged it in just fine. I could also underscore it, which I know many of you are going to like doing that as well. And I am fine with either of those two techniques. But you do need to choose one of those two techniques to work with in your program. And again, I would suggest that you stay consistent. That has to be one contiguous set of characters in order to be called a variable. Now, when it comes to variable assignments, we want to make sure we're not trying to start them with numbers. So we might say something like one pay rate. Not going to like that because you have to start them with a character. Special characters, other than like underscores, like dollar signs, hash symbols, things like that, you're not going to be able to use within your program because it might do something for it. That symbol might be allocated to something. Like the hash symbol is allocated to making a comment here, whereas like something like JavaScript or in what am I thinking of? The dollar sign might be allocated to something else. The percent sign is going to be allocated towards doing modular division. Same thing with the caret sign and the ands and the stars. They're all for something else. So you do have to be very careful with the types of characters you're placing in there. So my suggestion, again, keep it so that it's descriptive, noun-like in nature, lowercase the first word, and then the second and subsequent words do one of two things: capitalize the first letter for a camel casing feature, much like I did here, or separate your words by underscores. Either way works just fine. Now, once you do have your variables kind of set and ready to work, okay, then you can go off and do whatever kind of math you want with them. Okay, let's say I go back to my num1 equals 4 and my num2 equals 5, something like that. You just need to make sure you're doing the right math with them. There is all sorts of mathematical operators you can work with. Most of them are outlined in the textbook as being addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modular division, exponents, and such. Every programming language comes with those basics, and some come with even a few more. Let's just run through a couple of them. To do basic arithmetic, I might say something like num1 plus num2, and I can assign that to a variable like total, as I did before, like total equals num1 plus num2. But here in idle, it'll just spit out the answer for me so we can see it. Here it's 9. I could do num1 minus num2, -1. Num1 times num2. We'll use the star key to signify multiplication. Num1 divided by num2. It'll give me the decimal or a real number. This is the one operation you do have to be very conscientious of when you're working with it. Notice how all of the other examples resulted in an integer solution because I put in integer parts of the problem. This one, this single slash operation, the real division operation, will always yield a decimal number. Doesn't matter what you do. Even if I did 8 divided by 2, which we know is 4, it's going to give me a 4.0 instead. We do have another operation though. If I did something like num1 divided by num2, this is called the floor division or integer division. It will always basically eliminate the decimal. It'll round down. So here I get a 0 because there are not an equivalent number of 4s in 5. Okay. We can also do the mod operator. Now in the book, they do write the word mod out. In order to do it, here we use a percent sign, and that would give me the remainder of what's left over. If I did 4 divided by 5, there are no 4s or 5s in 4, so I have 4 left over each and every time. We'll start to pick up on that operation as we go. Here, we can also do exponents. If I use star star, that will give me a value of num1 star star, sorry, and it'll give me the value. And those are your basic arithmetic operators. You've got addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, floor division, modular division, and exponents to basically work with. All of them will give you the information that you need. If you pass in integer parts to your problem, you will get an integer solution. If you pass in floats, you will get a float solution. Unless, of course, you're working with the single slash, that will always yield a decimal answer. Okay. If you're looking for more notes and supplemental materials on this particular set, you can always travel back over to my website, look at the IPO section. Okay. And here I have basically everything that we've talked about in this unit listed out in Python so that you can kind of see what's going on. We've got comments, we've got the ability to write functions, the print statement, how it all works, variables, their declaration, naming, the data types that you can work with, integer, float, boolean, string, characters. We don't really do characters in Python, but they're there. Formatted print statements, which again, we will go through, input, and so on and so forth. When it comes to the operations, here's a detailed explanation of the operators and what they do: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, 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 exponents. Okay, and how you can work with them appropriately and what they will yield. So please make sure you read through this, and I will answer any questions you may have.